The way we have this
if you
session,
don't mind, can I
we've
take
sort
this
of
glass?
mixed it up a little to make sure that post-lunch slumber doesn't happen.
I'm ready to go.
Our fourth session of the day is on the theme of culture and its effect on employer brand. Deloitte has carried out, as usual, data analytics.
Thank you. You made my day.
On this theme, both from an internal sensing and an external sensing perspective. There are tools that we have used which our partners would walk you through. We have for this session with us Ms. Japneet Kaur, partner Deloitte, and Mr. Prakhar Tripathi, partner Deloitte and lead for financial services for a human capital perspective. The bonus of this session, however, is that there is a live polling. It is also going to be opened up for questions. So which is where I said the mixing up happens. I hope all of you fire away and shoot out the most awaited questions that you have kept.
Okay, hi. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, great. Good afternoon. Sorry again, apologies for the delay. I'm still to get into a meeting where there's no technological issue at all. So it's a record that I'm trying to, kind of Guinness Book of World Records. Every time something or the other goes wrong. In spite of being 17 years now working in part technology companies, I've still not been able to sort it out. But very glad to be here. I'll quickly introduce myself. I lead the people analytics or HR analytics for Deloitte South Asia. So everything in HR, what I'm trying to do is bring analytics, AI and now Gen AI into it. What we'll do in the next, between Prakhar and me in the next 30-40 minutes, we'll try to show you an external and internal view of the culture and brand perception of the banks, both public sector, private sector. We'll do a little bit to see what are the strengths of one, what are the opportunities for the other. So that's what we'll spend the next 30-40 minutes on. And again, core to what I do, we've used a lot of analytics to do it, which I'll talk about a little bit. So if you can. So just the slide of setting the context on how we've done the analysis so that you know what's coming, there's background behind it. So we actually looked at, I'll start with the external perspective first and then we'll gradually, Prakhar and I will come to the internal perspective as well. So most of you have seen Glassdoor Indeed, right? So we actually looked at about over 40,000 reviews from Glassdoor and Indeed. So essentially what our people, what our employees are going in and posting about ourselves on those platforms. We've just used machine learning algorithms to analyze that and understand what is the good, what is the bad, what are they saying is working well in these banks and what are they saying could be opportunities for us to grow. We've just made a framework of sorts so that we can structure our discussion. So you see the 5 pillars there. We're talking about empowerment and inclusion. So what are our people talking about that? What are our people talking about? Agility and innovation, a very important parameter, especially the way we are moving towards technology and more of innovation. We'll talk about performance and results, which is more around do we have a performance-driven culture, right? Do we have a result-oriented, outcome-oriented culture? We'll talk about ethics and sustainability, again, very, very critical, especially when it comes to banking. I mean, it's sort of critical everywhere right now. But we'll see the perception of what people feel, how ethical we are as organizations, how sustainable we are as organization. And finally, growth and learning, which is core to any organization's value proposition to employees, right? How do they see the growth opportunities, the learning opportunities that the organizations, and in this case, the banks are providing them. Moving on. So this is too many numbers, but then I'm an analytics person, but let me just break it down for you. So what you see, and the reason it's 3 decimal places because it was very close, so that was the only way to differentiate. But this is a scale of 0 to 10. It's based on sentiment analysis. So it's basically, 0 to 1. It's a scale of 0 to 1 to say what's the distribution of positive versus negative sentiment that people are putting out there, right? So what is the positive that they're saying about you? What's the negative that they're saying about the banks? And you saw on the previous slide, you've done about 29 banks, a combination of private and public. We had 11 public sector banks that we took and we had 18 private sector banks that we took. Now, overall, if you see, it's a decent positive sentiment. And we generally see, I've done this analysis, I think, for over 300 organizations now in the past 2-3 years. And generally, we see organizations lying between 0.5 to 1. So 0.7 is a good average score, I would say. Not too great, but nothing, not really bad as well. But what you see on the right hand side is now breaking it down. Where is where the power is, right? To say overall, okay, we look in the reasonably light green space, but what are the areas where we are doing well versus what are the areas where we are not doing so well? So if you see the comparison of some of the numbers, growth and learning, the dark green is the private sector banks and the light green is the public sector banks. I'll highlight the stark differences, right? I'll not go through all of them. Look at ethics and sustainability. That's one where public sector banks did significantly better than private sector banks. Growth and learning, while yes, we are seeing private sector banks doing better, but 0.83 itself is a good score. So, decent balance there. The other one I do want to highlight is performance and rewards. While the difference is not stark, but the overall score is low. So there is that question around, performance-based culture, rewards-based culture, and we'll go a little bit deeper into this as well to say when we say performance-based culture, what are we really hearing? What are people saying about it? What's going well versus what's not going well? Probably the only other one to say is agility and innovation. Now, just to add a little bit of narrative around it, we did hear that private sector banks are probably better, but we also heard that public sector banks are good on that journey, right? They've started to adopt new technology. So while the overall score is slightly lower, but we also heard, whatever from the sentiment that they are on the right track of looking forward to new technologies and new innovation. Moving on. So now this is, each of the dot is each of the bank here. So we just wanted to show you that while what the average is saying, but also the distribution. And that's interesting because you see, you have banks which are, pulling down the number. So you have that 0.6 of sort, plus you also have the 0.85, 89 of sorts. The other thing you'll see is overall public sector banks are slightly behind if you look at the percentile score as compared to the private sector banks. Moving on. So a little bit more deep dive into it. Now this is the same distribution of banks but by each of the pillars we discussed. Now again, what we were looking in the overall scores, now here it is again coming as a very stark comparison. Look at ethics and sustainability. Look at the difference in the two lines between the public sector and the private sector banks. So you can see as far as the distribution of banks is concerned, there is definitely private sector banks doing better on ethics and sustainability as compared to our public sector banks doing better as compared to our private sector banks. The other one I highlighted earlier, right, agility and innovation. Look at the bottom graph. Now you can see significant difference between the public sector bank distribution and the private sector bank distribution. The private sector bank is showing higher on, innovation, new technologies and stuff. So we'll go forward and deep dive into what really this means, right? So what are some of the key exact things that we are hearing from people? And the interesting part, you will see how we sort of correlate it to what we heard from you as well. So public sector banks, the strengths that people are perceiving are the stability, the clarity, the progression path clarity, everything is certain around them, everything is stable around them. The other big, if you look in contrast, private sector banks, there's the high in people is about the learning opportunities. The high is the growth opportunities that they're getting. The other high that private sector banks are seeing is the flexibility that they're getting. So see the difference, right? There's no right and wrong, it's your value proposition. But the perception around what's good in public sector banks is more around stability, whereas in private sector banks is more around flexibility. If I look at what people raised as sort of concerns around what's not happening well, if you look at public sector banks, there was stuff around pressure, a little bit of the environment. It's not very conducive. We heard some of those sentiment in a different tone in private sector banks as well. One common theme that I was highlighting earlier also, it's manifested in different ways across two, like we had a lot of comments around the process not being very well done. So, there was this voice around that as a concept, the banks have put in performance-based pay, But when it actually comes to implementing it, they probably don't get that level of support from their immediate manager. So that's one we heard. You will see some strong words there, but that's also what exactly people put in, right? Stuff around biases or unprofessional behavior and how the process is run. But this is an important one because we saw it in both public and private sector banks that there was a question on performance-based pay, performance-based, promotions and recognition. So that's one thing area we would like to call it. I'll invite Prakhar to join me.
Yeah. So I think one, good afternoon and thank you for being such a patient audience. Fortunately we did not lag on time since morning. Only now we had a 5-minute lag. But I think there was a lot of data on the screen and we sort of looked at this data in light of the survey that we ran and the external sensing that we did. But what's coming out very clearly, if you want to think about, and here's the contrast in this slide. If you look at this slide which talks about strength of PSB banks, those strengths are exactly the opportunity areas for private sector banks. So the themes are the same. So when public sector bank says that career progression and linkage of performance with the outcomes of those ratings is an area which they see as an opportunity area where ratings are coming out, but what it leads to still sort of remains a black hole. That exactly is the strength which came out for private commercial banks. Now it's important to look at how public sector banks have embarked on this journey. Round about 2012, 2013 is when the first wave of performance management happened in public sector banks, where the biggest public sector bank in India envisaged on the journey of reinvigorating the performance management culture. It has been almost a decadal experience, and most public sector banks today as they stand have done a lot of work around the area of recording performance, measuring performance, making sure there is least manual intervention as far as goal setting and their alignment to target versus actual is concerned, and linking it to a rating. What's sort of the bigger question mark in the room and what most leaders in public sector banks are dealing with is to link those ratings to an outcome. Now in the construct of how public sector narrative works, government, I'm sure in this room we have so much wisdom around banking, there's a PLI scheme which was launched. The PLI scheme clearly talks about profit sharing in a certain percentage basis to everyone. That's linked to the bank's performance. Whereas if you contrast it to a private commercial organization, what's very clear is ratings linked to the outcomes, and those outcomes are widely of three kinds, right? You will either have an impact on fixed pay increment or a bonus increment, which by the way can differentiate for people within the same function, which is not the case in public sector bank. You will have performance ratings impacting career choices because your promotion in a way sort of is linked to your rating. Rating becomes a gate in most cases. And the third one is your learning and development opportunities, because one part of performance management is also to understand what you're good at and what you're not so good at, or what are the skills that you would want to acquire. Now here's the contrast. I don't know how many of us in the room are aware. There's a very interesting shift that we have observed. Two of the leading private commercial banks in the country have done away with normalization or forced ranking. So on one hand you have private commercial banks who are slowly now drifting towards not trying to force rank, and then you have the entire public sector ecosystem which is trying to differentiate as much as they can. And as I said, the question mark still remains that what do you do when you have those ratings? And I'm sure when we talk to some of the MDs and CEOs as leaders of banks in India, we will get to know more about what keeps them awake at night when it comes to talent challenges and people challenges. But this seems to be in all our conversations and surveys that we have done, come out as one area of opportunity for public sector banks. And what do you do with the ratings when you have measured everything through technology? And just wanted to leave you with that thought that while public sector banks are making this sea change towards trying to see how performance can be objectively measured and differentiated, there is another wind of change where some of the leading private commercial banks are completely doing away with differentiation. So very interesting times and interesting trend there. The second point that I would like to highlight, and I take the liberty to challenge the popular perception, the very first point that you see on the public sector bank side on work-life balance. We have another slide that we will show you where we did a targeted survey with 11 public sector banks. Work-life balance has come out as a single biggest area of opportunity, we also sort of try to break it down into what element of work-life balance, because work-life balance could mean a lot of things. Now, work-life balance is the single biggest area which public sector employees have said that it impacts my experience as an employee. It also sort of hinders our ability to hire the best-in-class talent. So again, challenging perceptions, work-life balance, stress-induced environment is now the biggest concern that has emerged in the public sector ecosystem. And those of you who are in public sector banks and are leading those franchises, we would like to know more about it as we open up for questionnaire. Another point that I wanted to highlight here is the thing that you see around private commercial banks. In private sector, one of the points that you see is on ethics, and I would not want to use, because verbiage could have a negative connotation, but ethics. When we started to sort of double click on that and see what it meant by ethics, every public sector bank today has a very clear outlined, demarcated, listed purpose and linkage to ethics. And that element is a very strong criteria when it comes to their employee value proposition. So they would talk about ethics, a purpose, and put it upfront as a reason why people should come and work for us. Now, one can always question that what's in it for me. For a common employee, if you think about and this is data and not my own personal view, but if you think about the top 3 drivers why people would want to work for a company, it's what the company offers them as a challenge, and the challenge could be cerebral challenge, the challenge could be I want to learn new skills, the compensation, which is a reality, and in Southeast Asia, designation. Designation, by the way, features in the first 3 reasons of what people want to derive from their workplace. The third and the fourth was closely contested between purpose and ethics. Surprisingly, private sector banks in that area, the survey respondents, and this is neutral survey respondents that we have collected through external sensing, have highlighted that ethics is a concern. If we can go to the next slide. So the key takeaway from the previous slide was that the areas of opportunity which came out for public sector banks seems to be the areas of strength for private commercial bank. The areas of opportunity for private commercial banks seems to be the area of opportunity. So there's a lot of reason why forums like these, where there is cross-pollination of idea and banks are actually talking to each other, learning from each other's experiences, have a lot of value. We said that let's go ahead and do a targeted survey to understand more about what is work-life balance. When people are saying work-life balance, what is learning opportunities? What do they mean by that? Because learning opportunities again could mean how you're learning, what you're learning, from whom are you learning. Work-life balance could mean a lot of other things, and there is a specific element of talent attraction. Now, because it's a mixed house, we all should be cognizant of the fact that when it comes to private sector banks compete in an open market, and that's why the war for talent is significant. You go and hire, we all as private commercial banks, we would go and hire from an open market. Contrast to the public sector ecosystem, where there is a common pool of talent which comes in. That pool of talent then is groomed, developed, skilled, upskilled, and then moved around. The concept of universal banking. That concept also has seen a mind shift. We have seen a shift which was quite not anticipated. Again, 2 of the leading private commercial banks in India have started to rotate their top talent at the highest levels. So the trend that we are seeing, which is very profound and in contrast in performance management, is also now emerging, where specialization seems to be the keyword in public sector, which is being debated. There was also all of you are aware that there was a concerted effort to get in lateral talent for specific niche skill set in public sector bank, which is verticalization and specialization. On the other hand, private commercial banks, known for verticalization, specialization, you join a certain function and you tend to grow with it, unlike the rotation that's very prevalent in public sector bank, that is getting diffused at the highest levels. So again, a very interesting trend that we observe there. But talking about this survey, this was rolled out to 11 public sector banks. The top 2 themes which emerged, which said that, and were the top factors that distinguish the culture of public sector bank, is loyalty and job security. Now we were sort of grappling with what loyalty is. So we'll try and ask you that question through a quick survey that we'll do. But loyalty came out as one of the first and primary points, followed by job security. No surprises there. We then did a sort of a double click, And follow me on this slide, please. It's sort of a story which weaves in. The very first question that was asked was, what's the driver for employee experience? Right? So for you as an employee, what is the most important element which gives you a superior experience? So end user is responding to it. Number one which stood out was technology. And technology, how it improves my productivity. So it's important. Technology, unlike Amazon where things are available quickly, this is how technology is impacting my productivity. Now there's a theme emerging, and just stay with me on this. People were saying that, and this is public sector bank cohort, where the biggest opportunity area was work-life balance. Employee experience, people are saying, listen, help me with a technology which can improve my productivity in a hope that my work-related stretch and extended work hours are reduced. The second point which is coming is, again, reinforcing what we saw in the first one, clear linkage of performance to reward through differentiation. I think what we are consistently hearing as far as public sector banks are concerned is we have started to differentiate. We have put in technology to make sure that there is no nepotism, there is no favoritism, actual versus target is picked up from the system, ratings are coming out, but what's happening through those ratings is still not clear, and it's important to me. It defines my experience. The third one is providing learning and development opportunities, again becomes vague. So we quickly followed it up with the second question, that what if you want to think about transforming learning and development, what are the factors which are important to you? So what are the enablers of talent and development? The top 33% weightage, we observed that people said better content and partnership, technology which can improve access and user experience, and exposure to different ways of working. Now these are words, these are sentences. We looked at what are the examples in the industry. One question that most industry forums and IBA is leading that discussion as well is, why can't banks pool in their resources and put a collaborative attempt towards developing niche skills? So there are a set of skills where digital and analytical skills and risk skills which most banks need, in fact all banks need. Why can't banks collaboratively look at developing those skills internally? Why can't we go to best in class and ask them to come and teach through an ecosystem which obviously has moved away from a brick and mortar physical learning centers that most of the banks have invested in the past? The next pit stop for us was, what's the driver of employee value proposition? And if you want to sort of try and understand this question and appreciate it a little better, what will make you an employer of choice? What will make people come to you to work with you? What will make people who are working with you stay with you? That's the question. Work-life balance. Work-life balance continues to come in very different shapes and forms. 50%, that's a standout response that we received. 50% of the respondents said work-life balance is one of the first drivers of employee value proposition. Opportunity of challenging work and learning new skills, obvious. Larger purpose of working, which is towards nations and society. I think while this response came from public sector banks, it's a key takeaway for our private commercial banks, that it features as one of the top 3 areas of value proposition for employees. We also asked bankers, what are the people detractors? So if you think about the future growth of the banks, what according to you is the biggest challenge we're grappling with? Now, the first one which came out is inability to hire and retain quality and skilled talent. And we spoke to some of the respondents to understand what it means. And very interesting, and we'll try and talk about it as we'll see some of our MD and CEO and leaders of banking sector come in. As far as niche skills and tech skills are concerned, banking has never been an obvious choice. Technology talent is not native to banking. So someone who passes out with the best-in-class technology degree doesn't aspire on the day of placement to get into a bank. They aspire to join a product or a technology services company. If you're a sector which is getting disrupted the most, one of the top 3 sectors, in fact, banking, are disrupted through technology, and the kind of talent set that you seek is not seeking you, then there is a problem statement, which again I think is getting reflected as we talk about what is the biggest detractor of future growth. The second point which got highlighted is not having a ready succession and leadership program. Now, there's a concerted effort, there is a very defined program that runs at the topmost levels across all public sector banks, but what we realize is up until for people to reach those levels And there's also a popular perception that the leadership gap in terms of the capabilities of people who are coming into that zone of consideration of being a future leader, there seems to be a perceived gap, and how that gap can be bridged. And the third and the most important point is lack of empowerment to the middle management. We were not able to sort of dissect it further, but by empowerment, most of the respondents highlighted the lack of autonomy and ability to take decisions. Now, if again, lot of messages in this slide, here are the key messages. As far as attracting and retaining talent is concerned, which by the way is one of the biggest challenges for banking, as you can see in column number 4, work-life balance is getting impacted by that. Work-life balance has come out as the biggest value proposition for employees. Hiring the niche skill set seems to be the biggest detractor, and technology to improve productivity seems to be the call of the day. Now, what we'll do for you is, and we realized that within this room we have so much wisdom and experience within banking, and we didn't want to let go of this opportunity. We have put together a small Mentimeter survey for all of you. So, if I may just request you, it's a simple, you will have to go to mentimeter.com, join menti.com rather, and use the code that's there on the screen. You'll see the survey going live. Guys, can you go around and see if someone needs help? Sorry? Yeah, I can't read it from. The code is, I'll read it out for all of you who have logged in. 43465537. 43465537. So as soon as you log in, you should be able to respond. The very first question is, how can banks engage talent better? Wow. So it's moving right now. It seems like clearly defined career path. Again, better work-life balance. Our surveys didn't let us down, seems to be the trend. Work-life balance, career path. More employee-friendly policies. Okay. And one has to remember this room has a mixed audience. So we have bankers from public sector as well as private commercial banks. Because the minute I saw a linkage of performance with so this was sort of a stress test for us. We said that let's test to what extent work-life balance continues to occupy our mind spaces. And one has to always look at work-life balance in light of the fact that technology has to improve productivity that will eventually alleviate the work-related stress that we all have. Okay, so very clearly, 43% respondents in this room have voted for better work-life balance is a way banks can engage their talent better. 23% very clearly have said that give us better career paths, or a clearly defined career path rather, followed by linkage of performance to monetary. Now that's in a typical scenario, most of us would like to believe that the way to engage talent is to pay them more. All of you just responded that that's not the case. Let's go to the second one. Now this is the question that we sort of wanted to ask, because when most people said talent and development is an opportunity area, how can banks upskill at speed and upskill at scale? Now these are two important words. How do you upskill at speed, which is the need of the hour, and how do you upskill at scale? Most private sector banks and public sector banks especially, we're looking at a headcount of upwards of 150,000 employees. So upskill at speed and upskill at stage. Can you switch this on? So 73, can you switch this on? So it's working? Yeah. So 73% respondents have said that bank to combine resources to identify and train new age skills. Now that's an interesting concept, and we were just talking about it in our previous slide. In fact, those of you who have followed the trend in banking, back in 2010, 2011 I think, there was a first attempt to pool in resources and start to hire cohorts for all the banks for specific niche skills and train them together. But very clearly what comes out is that in this need of hour where disruption is inevitable, when it comes to skills, we could have banks pool in their resources and start to train people at speed and at scale. Very interesting observation there. Still going up, 79%. Actually, as far as the second point is concerned, most public sector banks have their own learning universities. SBI Learns, the SBI Learning Centers, there are infrastructures that have been set up across India by most public sector banks. But the first point, and we deliberately wanted to highlight that and ask that to you as a question, that what it takes, and is it a too wacky an idea or is it a realistic practical idea to bring together resources, collaborate and upskill at speed and scale. Can we go to the next question please? So what are the ways? So we all realize that work-life balance is important. Coming out as one of the prominent areas as far as employee experience and value proposition is concerned. What are the ways in which banks can improve work-life balance? Okay. Improve work processes and workflows. So the onus is with the employer. Bring in more technology to improve process efficiency. Okay, this is interesting. Classical conventional wisdom, most functional heads, I have issues with delivery, hire more. That's not coming out as a response here. Redefine hierarchy or reporting structures. We thought that what if organizations wanted to demystify org structures and improve productivity. But what's clearly coming out is technology to improve process efficiencies and improve work processes and workflow. Staffing norm seems to be right. We are right staffed as banks. It's more to do with processes and technologies very clearly, at least for the respondents in the room. Okay, let's go to the next one. If you remember, there was a element of loyalty which came out when we rolled out the survey, that what is a feature or characteristic of public sector banks which make people stay, and people said loyalty and job security. So what's loyalty? It was important for us to understand, and I'm sure it could be an important observation for some of you here as well. Loyalty to my professional code, and this in a way is and we believe that that's how the responses would be, because there's a linkage to the purpose. There's linkage to the purpose, there's linkage to the value, there's linkage to the ethics. So just so that all the options are clear, loyalty to my employer / bank, loyalty to my manager / leader, loyalty to my customer, or loyalty to my professional code. It's a vehement loyalty to my professional code. So, because loyalty could have meant anything, and we wanted to understand what loyalty is, and on one hand people were talking about purpose and value, and we sort of believe that this will go towards the professional code and what they joined banking for. But if I were to just sort of summarize, and happy to take any observations, any learning experiences as far as these questions are concerned. The idea was to look at the culture tenets which are same, not same between public sector and private sector. We did the external sensing exercise, did a mathematical modeling to understand what those numbers are. What came out very clearly, I'm just sort of summarizing it together as a key takeaway, is that the areas which were opportunity for private sector bank were the areas of strength for public sector bank and vice versa. And what those areas were, we sort of tried to deep dive through a survey. So the key takeaway as far as your responses goes is that from an employee value proposition perspective, why you will be able to, what's your promise as an employer to your future employees and existing employees, is give them a better work-life balance as far as PSB responses are concerned through improved processes which just came out. Staffing seems to be right, improve the processes, get in better technology to improve the process efficiencies as well and productivity as well. As far as learning and development is concerned, one very interesting feature that came out was that the need of the hour is to upskill at scale and upskill at speed. And one idea which banks may want to sort of explore, and we have been advocating that for a fairly long time, is to collaborate as far as identifying the right skills is concerned. That's the first step. Identifying the curriculum to build those at speed, and then pool in their resources to sort of do it together. What we also realized is that there is a very strong linkage to purpose and vision, purpose and values. And ethics seems to be one area where private commercial bank respondents clearly have highlighted that there's a lag, there's a disconnect. No one's talking about ethics. It doesn't feature in my value statement. It doesn't feature in most of my employee value branding that I do, that the banks do. So if you were to look at it, private commercial banks on as far as ethics and commitment to ethics and values are concerned, and we'll get to see, because we did our research to realize which are those banks which stand out today. And we invited the leaders of those banks to come and talk to us about what ethics would mean. I would like to also draw your attention to the last point that I wanted to make, that as far as performance, reinvigorating the performance culture is concerned, pretty much every public sector bank today has started to differentiate talent. Everyone has actually integrated their legacy systems into a very technology savvy performance management system where goal setting is done at the start of the year. The numbers are extracted through the actual versus target are extracted through the system on a real time basis, which very often is monthly or 45 days. What most banks are now grappling with is what to do with that differentiation. And we did highlight the fact that there seems to be a wind of change as far as private commercial banks are concerned, where some of them are doing away with differentiation altogether. So it's an interesting time to be in banking. As a consultant, I believe this is one of the best time to be in banking, because you see a reverse osmosis. You see the trends changing and there are learnings on both the sides. Let me just take a pause. We obviously will compile it, and all the participants, we're going to release it in form of a learning newsletter that we will release. But any observations, any comments? Karan, if you could just rotate the mic. Anything that you agree, disagree with, anything that you think hasn't been covered, any trend which hasn't featured in, and while this is a very formal setting, would request if there's an observation, please let us know. I think we are 45 minutes after lunch, seems to be insulins have spiked out. What we'll do is we will now break for, there's a tea break, and we'll break for tea, but right after the tea is our main session for the day. We have MDs of various banks who will join us on stage.